Welcome to Authentic Educators, a podcast by teachers for teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can implement today. Most, if not all, educators have unfortunately witnessed moments in their classrooms when students can't hold it together. Whatever the cause, a student who has become deregulated is a significant impediment to a classroom's learning and emotional environment. I have noticed that the current crop of students, who have all had some level of impact by the COVID pandemic, seem to struggle with self-regulation more acutely than those in the past. Katie McLaughlin de Vries taught elementary and middle school students for several years before pivoting to work with an earlier guest of ours, Thom Stecher. Her specialty is understanding how students' brains work, particularly regarding learning outcomes. Dave and I were riveted by what we learned from Katie. There are intentional and sometimes simple steps that can empower all educators to help students when they need it the most. We hope you enjoy the episode. Earlier in class today, I had a student who had an issue trying to make peace with a decision or situation that the student wasn't very happy with. And so I'm really excited in this week's episode to talk with Katie McLaughlin about the concept of how students and adults can better self-regulate and understand a little bit more about the brain, which is something I don't know too much about. And so welcome to our guest, Katie.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Can you tell us anything about your background, like where you're coming from, to start us off?
Absolutely. So I started off my career in education, like many people, as a classroom teacher. I originally wanted to be in secondary ed. Then I found my way into middle grades and eventually elementary school. So my experience is mostly fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. That is my favorite age group. And, a little bit before COVID, during COVID, and then of course after COVID, things looked a little different. And I'm so grateful for my experience because now I work for Thom Stecher and Associates. We specialize in social emotional learning skills and strategies. And now I get to work with teachers and students all over the country to help us be better humans.
Dave and I had the pleasure of interviewing Thom as our first interview, I think, Dave, earlier
Correct.
episode in the season. So it's exciting. We both took classes through Thom and loved it. And we're excited to talk to somebody else from the program.
And Thom, I was going to say, spoke highly of you. And when we spoke to him back in September, or maybe it was August, he said, you need to talk to Katie. And we love everything Thom's about because it's often, about being a better teacher, but it all just comes to, probably does tie a lot to being a pretty well-adjusted adult, which then makes you a well-adjusted teacher. So I'm excited to hear from you today.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm excited because today what I want to chat about, what I want to talk with you both about are different ways that we can support students and even adults with self-regulation skills. So when I was in the classroom, I started to notice it obviously pre-COVID, but post-COVID was when, I had a class of 29 students. I didn't have any adult support. It was just me and them, and they were 9 turning 10. And it used to be that there were a few students that needed more support with self-regulation skills, with social skills, everything. And a lot of those students were getting support from other adults, whether it be other teachers, whether it be outside of school. But I started to notice that, excuse the squeaking in the background, if you can hear that, I
Oh, I
apologize.
didn't know.
I have a 5-month-old puppy.
Nice.
Cool.
I started to notice that my students all around were lacking in these areas. Like many teachers, to get to the content, to get to teaching math, to get to the science unit, I found myself putting out so many fires before I could even get to the academics. And I was growing frustrated with myself, and inevitably, I was growing frustrated with my students until I learned that it's not them. It's not them. So I'm going to first talk about a book that I highly recommend. It's called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry. He is a neurologist in the trauma world. And I don't remember exactly how I stumbled across this book, but I learned so many things that changed how I showed up for my students. It changed how I problem solved with them, and it helped me want to be proactive instead of reactive when a situation would happen in the classroom. So, to start, the first thing is understanding our brain. This was mind blowing to me, and it has stuck with me ever since day one. And that is our brains cannot tell the difference between fantasy and reality. And you would
Wow.
think, as being so smart as our brains are, it doesn't understand. Its job is to keep us safe. And that's why when we're watching a scary movie, we can tell ourselves over and over again, it's just a movie, but we still jump in those scary scenes because our brain's job is to protect us. Now,
Right.
this is
Okay.
super important when it comes to children. It's super important when it comes to young adults and even, fully grown adults, is that our brains are playing tricks on us.
Mhm.
So whether we're actually in danger or we're not, our brain is going to respond the same way. So why this was important for me is I started teaching my students about the brain when we weren't having extreme emotions. And this is the language I would use. And I even use this language with adults. And basically, we have the upstairs part of our brain and we have the downstairs part of our brain. The downstairs part of our brain is responsible for our extreme emotions, for fight, flight, freeze. This is where our bodily fluids and functions, this is the part that keeps us safe. So when we feel like we're being threatened, we are in downstairs brain. And this is what I didn't know. To get to upstairs brain, when you are in upstairs brain, that is where the part of your brain of problem solving, that's where empathy is. That's where responsible decision making is. So if we feel threatened, we are essentially in that survival mode, which a lot of people are familiar with. What they don't recognize is that we cannot access certain information if we're in survival mode or if we're in downstairs brain. So why that's important for children is, okay, for example, I had a student, I had a maker space in my room. This is my favorite example. I had a maker space in my room, and she was really upset one day because in the mornings I would allow them to create anything they wanted. And our process was, if you were creating something and you weren't finished, but it was time to clean up, you had to put your initials on it and you put it on a special cart, which, signals to everyone that this is a work in progress. Please don't touch it. So
Somebody touched it.
somebody touched it. And talk about the hot tears, the big ones
Oh,
rolling down. And she was in downstairs brain. She could not get herself to a point of kind of what we would call like reasonable thinking, of having a conversation. She was so unbelievably upset. And I was seeing this more and more. So what I did with my students when I was teaching them is, how do we get out of downstairs brain? That is the piece that's missing in education. Maybe we're telling them about survival mode. Maybe we're telling them, hey, this is upstairs brain thing. How do we get from one to
right.
the other? And
Oh,
that's where Dr. Bruce Perry helped.
okay.
So educators, we have to remember three things. They're all ours, so hopefully they are easy to remember. And the first one, when we are speaking with a child, something happens, and the first thing educators do, there's tears, maybe someone's upset, we say, what happened? What's wrong? And that's how we approach it. Oftentimes, students will shut down, they don't answer the question, and we just want to get to the facts. What we need to know is they can't access that information in their brain.
Because it's just what, like, there's a fog, there's a block, there's a whatever it
Absolutely.
might be. Okay.
They literally can't reach it. They are so immersed in their extreme emotion because they feel threatened because something's going on, because their brain can't tell that, hey, you are in a safe space like school. It can't access that. So our job is the three R's. The first R is regulate. The second R is relate. And then the third R is reason. So let's talk about regulation. This is the important part. It's not about the tools that we give our students, it's
Mm-hmm.
how we teach them to use them. So it's really important that when we're teaching children how, or young adults, or even adults, how to self-regulate, that we are teaching them when they are not having an extreme emotion. It's the before. So how to regulate your body. At first, when I learned about this, I was like so excited to hear all of the answers. And then I was like, oh, That's pretty underwhelming. I kind of already knew that. So some examples are anything with rhythm, whether that is soft music, whether it is a consistent beat. I don't know. Can you hear that? Is it
Yeah,
kind
a
of
little
You're
picking up
snapping your
there.
fingers.
yeah. Whether with that rhythm is also movement. If you teach children how to walk, or young people or adults, if you teach them how to walk to the same pace, to the same beat, then and to pay attention to the way that they're walking, this is going to help us self-regulate. I taught my students, I had a specific binder of blank coloring sheets. And they knew that they had to grab the binder, they could grab the coloring utensils, and they went into the hallway where I could still see them. And I taught them how to watch their coloring strokes back and forth, back and forth. It's not about staying in the lines. It's not about finishing the picture. It's focusing on those strokes. It's giving your body time to basically calm down.
And
And where this comes from, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to ask a question because something I'm thinking with this rhythmic everything, I'm assuming you're about to go here, but it sounds very related to your heart pulse.
Exactly. I'm so glad that you said that. Where it comes from is as newborns, that's why skin to skin contact. That's why when you have a new puppy and they have these toys now that you can buy that simulate their mother's heartbeat.
Wow.
That consistent beating is comforting, and it truly it helps our body calm down. And if you want to escalate that even more, if you can be outdoors in nature, our brains love predictability, which is why we love patterns. If you can look at the trees and figure and find as many patterns as you can. If you can look at the grass, listen to the sounds of nature. Obviously, that's not practical when you have 30 kids and you're in a classroom.
Right.
So our job as educators is, how do I bring that experience to them? So what I would do is not only teaching them how to color and watch their strokes, teaching them how we would call it take a lap. I'd give them a choice. Do you need to take a lap or do you want to go color?
But an
And
intentional lap, right? Because, right, it's like if you just go for a lap or go for a walk, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is new to me, right? If you've taught them the pattern of like maybe counting your footsteps or going like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and it's that walk, which you would be doing anyway. But is it? Am I correct in that you're just trying to have your brain process that rhythm so it's a meaningful and purposeful lap? Is that correct?
absolutely. We want to make
Okay.
sure that everything is intentional. And I think the language that I found the most helpful was, as adults, sometimes we get really skeptical about children or young people's intentions. And we're like, oh, I have a kid who would run around the school for the rest of the day.
Right.
When we teach these as skills, when we teach these as, if for 9 times out of 10, we don't want to feel that way.
Sure.
How many times have we been in the middle of a test and you don't know the answer? And I know for me, the hot tears start. And I get so angry at myself. I don't want others to see me getting upset.
Sure.
I don't want to feel this way anymore. And having that conversation with them about, this is a tool to get us out of that feeling of feeling like we're not in control.
That's so
And I
powerful.
found that the more authentic I was and the more I reflected on my own experiences, I have never had a child take advantage of it, or I put things in place to make sure that that wouldn't happen. Maybe that would be an extra adult, which never was the case because we don't always have extra adults. But really, I found that they were holding each other accountable. One of my favorite moments was I had a student who, I don't actually remember the situation, but he just broke down and was so upset. And a different student ran to grab the binder. A different kid ran to grab the coloring utensils and gave it to him, and walked him out into the centrum so I could see him. And they came up to tell me, so and so is coloring in the centrum. We just want to let you know.
That's
Like,
awesome.
they told me,
Wow.
and they're holding each other accountable. Certain kids, of course, I give a time or two, and then I have them check in with me. But I also think that the really important piece to this is we're teaching them how to do this so that they can do it on their own one day.
And they can help others.
They can help others. And one of the best ones too, especially for older kids, is teaching them how to intentionally doodle. It's very similar to meditation practices. If, you draw a heart on a sticky note. And again, it's important that this is before the extreme emotion. And we're drawing a heart and you're walking them through it. You take 5 minutes out of the beginning of your lesson and it's start drawing a heart, start on the left, like, going up and then down, and they're using their pencil and they're tracing the same lines, and then ask them to go to the right. Then ask them to slowly, lightly shade in the heart. Watch your strokes. Now press really hard. And we're teaching them essentially to be mindful. And we're teaching them mindful practices that slows down the brain.
So that girl that you mentioned in the makerspace who had somebody touch what shouldn't have been touched, right? There's a number of strategies you just mentioned with the walking, with the drawing, with even like a tapping on something where it's just trying to regulate yourself from that basement, from that bottom floor of your brain, right? And I'm thinking, it's like I've seen kids being highly emotional or having a big moment, and a lot of the times, I mean, I'll own this because this isn't an area of expertise for me, that, they sit in the chair and they're just kind of falling apart. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, well, now I'm getting why they're not able to process better, because there was no intentional attempt to help regulate them.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm like, all right, well, shame on me, but hopefully I can, change that and work on that from this conversation forward.
And that's what it is, right? Because even as adults, how many times have we had a conversation with someone and we hang up the phone? That's flight. Your brain thinks that your brain is in danger. You think your body's in danger, and it's fleeting the situation, so it hangs up. And like as adults,
screaming at somebody.
Exactly the opposite, which is verbal fighting, right? So us practicing these as well, taking a moment to breathe and say, I'm in downstairs brain right now. Oh my gosh, after recess, the kids knew. It's so overwhelming, right? I'd say, I'm in downstairs brain. I need a moment. They were so respectful because I was showing them that I'm a human too, and that I need these skills. The difference though is you're the adult, and modeling that, it's just so important.
Something I was going to say, Katie, is like you're saying they were so respectful, but I think a lot of it comes down to because you were so respectful to them. And I feel like this through line through all of this is definitely that you're like meeting them as humans and not as students, which is the big piece. And you're like honoring the fact that you guys are going to be emotional some days. You're going to have stress at times. And on the human end, forget whatever the academic curriculum is, you're preparing for that. And all the way back in the beginning of the interview, I'm still like locked in on the whole, our brains not knowing the difference between fantasy and reality. And that actually, it reminds me of another book called Brain Rules that I remember Thom used to share a lot about, and how our brains are not that far advanced beyond, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and that we still treat so many things in a fight or flight way. And some of that might even be the worries we have that will never come true, but we fight against that or we run from it. Yeah. And it seems like today, and I hate to always use the post-COVID, but it seems like, Cody, you just mentioned anxiety, like that's a big thing that people fight against or run from. And I think really kids need to learn how to deal with and cope with stress, because a notice I've seen at the high school level is a lot of flight in terms of kids will just not do work at alarming rates versus the past. Like in the past, I can recall earlier in my career 14 years, 15 years ago, 1 out of 30 kids wouldn't submit something. And now, depending on the level of the class, you might get
10, 15, 20.
Sure, you might have a 60% submission rate. And it's sort of like, oh my God, like what's going on here? And so that is a real, I guess it's a real thing, understanding all that.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned the 3 R's, right? It was regulate, I got reason, but I must have been in lower brain and forgot the middle one.
That's okay. And then the last, so regulate, relate, and then reason. So,
Okay.
and keep in mind, this is a process and nothing is perfect. I think in
Right.
education, we have so many stressors. We're looking for the magic pill that it's like, oh, I'm going to implement this in my classroom and then I'll never have this problem again. And that's just not true.
Daily work, right?
Of course. And I think it's also important to know that children under the age of 18, we are seeing so many more cases of mental health concerns. Like this does not replace professional support and diagnosis. And these are small things that we can do for those everyday
Hmm.
emotions that we all kind of feel, but it shouldn't replace professional help. So I just want to make sure that that is said. But basically, after the regulate, and you can notice, pay attention to their breathing. Pay attention. Are their teeth clenched? Are they getting into the coloring now? Are they done tapping? If that's what they were doing. Are they walking slower now? You can tell when someone has calmed down, and that's when it's the human piece comes out. We
Okay.
want to relate to them, ask them about their weekend, but make sure it's authentic. As
Hmm.
you should know something about your student at this point in the year, or even in December, or even in October. Grasp onto something that and ask them about something positive in their personal life. Relate to them as a human being. And then we get to the reasoning. Then they have made their way to upstairs brain, where when you say, so tell me what happened. So tell me why you and so, like where did it begin? They can literally now access that information and have a conversation with you. And sometimes we get back in that extreme emotion and it's okay, we're gonna pause.
That's a little
I want
cycle, right?
you to either keep doing what you're doing, or we're going to come back to this later. They're already in upstairs brain. Let's head back to learning. Let's continue learning, and we're going to put the situation aside for now because we need to learn. We're here to learn. And they're back in upstairs brain. Their brain knows that they're safe, and sometimes we need to do what we need to do, which is to keep learning. And then we're going to revisit this.
I feel like what you just said reminded me of something in our interview episode with Tom, where one of the things he suggested was, have a student where you intentionally, almost like if you're not teaching the next period or it's lunch or whatever, where you almost like walk with the student to where they're going. Not obviously in a creepy way. Obviously, that could be kind of like, oh, what's going on here? But that could be something where you bring up that conversation, or in the beginning of the day, was before the first bell rings, to just have those follow up conversations. So I'm seeing kind of the connections in between you and Tom. Obviously, working with him, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I feel like that relationship bit is something that just comes up in so many of our episodes in so many different ways, and that if we can't do that, there's so much else that we can't do. So I was going to ask a follow up question to you, in
Yeah.
that you mentioned the young lady with the makerspace issue. Are there any other? I mean, obviously everybody has unique circumstances. My students different than your students, different than Dave's students, etc. But I think if you kind of told our audience maybe another story of where you saw this actively working, that they
Mhm.
might be able to relate, right, using one of our R's there, relate to a student that they have in their third period, or have some sort of intentional comparison. Are there any other stories that come to your mind where you did these R's with a student and had a positive outcome?
Absolutely. So usually related to academics, at the time when I was really implementing this, it was like where I had it down to a process. I was teaching fourth grade,
Okay.
and we were adding and subtracting fractions, which if anyone has experience knows that that is a tough unit. And so in terms of academics, the hot tier start, I kind of mentioned that when we're taking a test. It was always available to students when we were taking tests. But I think the key is giving them choices. With younger children, it may look different than older kids, but with younger kids, you're giving them choices, and all of them are safe and productive ways to get out of this feeling.
Okay.
So oftentimes in academics, whether that's, like I said, a test or learning something new, a lot after recess, A lot. And that's where it relates to the older kids, is where they're having external conflicts with friends. Maybe someone was cheating during a soccer game. Maybe a friend, specifically, there was a young boy and it was after bathroom. He vandalized the bathroom. And obviously, I did everything that I needed to do to, alert administration and whatnot. But I wanted to get to the why. I wanted to understand why was he vandalizing the bathroom. But I knew
Mm-hmm.
pulling him out of the bathroom and sitting down and asking him, so why did you just put toilet paper everywhere and turn on the sinks and clog the drain? Like I wasn't going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, and
Because fight or flight will kick in. He's going to defend himself, right? Like,
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that with that student in particular, I think it's also important to note that this is a student who, if he wasn't vandalizing the bathrooms, he was putting his hands on another student or he was breaking kids' pencils. It was just something for me to lean on when I needed to get inside of his head and understand. But knowing that him coloring for 5 minutes or walking around the centrum is not fixing this huge problem. However, it gives me time as a teacher to, number one, give them a break. I can keep teaching or tell them to do a turn and talk or get an activity together before I need to step out and handle it. But most importantly, I'm giving them self-regulation skills they can take with them into hopefully
Life.
adulthood, but life.
So rather than just immediately, why did you do this? Now you said, I think you said that he had access to it. Like, was it an actual binder or a notebook? Like, what is the it that they had?
So they had a binder where they could color. We had an area outside our classroom where they could walk. And I had many lessons about, are you supposed to be looking and you're supposed to be looking in other classrooms? Obviously not. You shouldn't be going to the bathroom during this time. I also had clay in my room. So, but they had to like make stripes if they're making like flatten the clay, and they should be using a pencil and doing something productive and teaching them that. One of my favorite ones that I heard from someone else that is not mine was they would take all their dried out markers and they put the caps in one container and the dried out markers in a different container. And they had to snap all of them
yeah.
and then unsnap all of them.
So
And
they get
this,
the sound and the feeling,
yes. And
multi-sensory.
it's materials we already have. It's not hurting anyone. I had a student who ripped paper. They had to watch the paper. It's very intentional. We're not just ripping things and throwing things. That's not safe for anyone.
Is this idea that I'm going to share, it could not be a good idea. So please tell me, I won't be offended. So I have those, like, I call them test tents that kids like pop up. So it's less likely for their eyes to wander. And usually they're just kind of like stacked in a corner of my room. Like with the act of like, hey, go grab them and arrange them by color. Like, is that like movement? Does that, I don't know if that would fit in with one of the rhythm things for you or no.
I think it's anything that is getting their mind to do something that might feel mundane, that might feel procedural, it's really that um, repetitive and rhythmic and movement.
Okay.
Those are like the secret ingredients. But I would say with older kids, I think the most important thing is just to make sure that, you know, it's something that maybe you're doing as well, or that they've seen you do. If you're not in the back organizing folders, if that would be silly, maybe that's not for you. But if you
Okay.
have play and you're sitting there as you're giving yourself a moment, that would feel a little more natural. I think with
Okay.
older kids, they're more aware of how others are perceiving them. So the
Right.
more normal we can make it and make it a classroom community expectation and norm,
Katie, oh,
then
sorry.
it's go ahead.
I might have a mini aha moment that connects to this, and I want to hear your input because I think you
I love how
probably
confident you are. I might have one.
I might have an aha moment. Well, so it's funny. This year, the past few years, my wife and I had our first kid, and in the process of that, cleared out a bunch of stuff in my house, like went in massive purge. But I've always been a little like, um, how do I put it? Like messed with like fidget type of toys. Like they just occupied me, relaxed me for whatever reason. And I have more like I just have different things like, spinners and like kind of like not Rubik's cubes, but those types of things that are just occupy your brain and whatever. So I brought a bunch of them into my classroom and I put them in this bin that's on my desk. I've never done this before, but I did it this year, just like, oh, I'll get it out of the way. This will, whatever. But it actually, I found myself buying more things like this was because my kids are obsessed with them
Mhm.
and like trade them throughout the period. And I've, heard some PD where they talk about the value in that. But I really am thinking like, oh wow, the rhythmic thing is probably slowing down the heartbeat. It's probably helping them to regulate, whether I realize it or they realize it or not. And it's, there's been times where I'm like, oh, I wonder if this will be a distraction, but it's so shockingly hasn't been. It's actually been like kids walk into me, and half the times they don't even realize how something got into their hands, but they're playing with like some kind of a ball or a spinner. And I've literally heard kids say before, like, oh, wait, I like didn't even realize I picked this up. And it's often like I'll be having a good conversation with them and it's in their hands and I'm connecting the dots here. Like,
You're
I
doing
think
what
I'm,
Katie's been suggesting
yeah,
this episode. You just didn't know it.
I think I'm good
Or
with
maybe, I don't know.
the relating piece and decent with the reasoning, but I'm being mindful here. I'm like the regulation piece, you really do need to be thoughtful about that because again, you need to meet a kid where they're at. And if where they're at is freaking out, you can't reason with them. But I'm
Yeah.
realizing maybe that's been a nice inadvertent sort of like accidental good practice that's happened in my room this year that I've definitely noticed and reacted to because I've bought more stuff because it's been fun seeing that the kids like it.
Absolutely. And Dave, I think my opinion is it has more to do with you than the actual objects. Because that is what you hear a lot. A lot of teachers will say something like, "Oh, my kids would never, it would be a distraction." And maybe for the younger kids that could be true. But it sounds like you had this here in your room and it happened by accident and you embracing it and not starting off with, well, hold on. Let's talk
Hmm.
about all the rules. And if you do this, and if you like, it sounds like the way your style is in your classroom, the rapport that you have developed with them, the relationships that you have developed, they respect you. They're not throwing them across the room. They want to be there. They want to use these things. And that speaks to the relationship you have with them. And that's so important too. We aren't just walking in and being like, so this is what we're going to do
Hmm.
when we're freaking out. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way for anyone. Those little bits of trust. And then it also is do not bring in a whole cart of stuff and expect your
Yeah.
whole classroom. It's little bits at a time.
Right.
And what works for those kids this year that love those fidgets. I remember one year I had the kids who loved the clay, and then the next year no one used the clay. It just wasn't for them.
Hmm.
And it's really this trial and error, but it just matters that we're trying. And like you said, we're meeting them where they're at and we're giving them healthy tools and showing
Yeah.
how to use them.
I think we've given our audience, really a lot to process here. And so, a question I have for you, Katie, is, maybe a final question, perhaps, although typically we go back on that. Dave, is, if, this episode's going to release in May, so it's kind of the end of the school year, and too late to really build effective routines, not too late to not try to implement when you're having a kid who has lost regulation. But thinking about next school year or the beginning of any school year, teachers are different, styles are different, personalities are different, so there's no magic pill. But would there be any sort of broad strokes way that you would suggest our listeners to maybe start making it be part of their culture in the classroom?
I would start with yourself. I think that as long as we're authentic, anything we do, it's going to work out. Obviously, there's situations where we have certain students, they're all people, right? And they need different things, and every year presents different challenges for a number of reasons. But I think starting with yourself, how do you self-regulate? Because if you don't have any of your own tools at the moment, maybe it's a tough season of life, like the end of the year with testing and
Mm.
all those things. What are your self-regulation techniques? Pay attention to, do you start tapping your foot when you're aggravated? Do you find yourself rubbing your finger on your nails when you're anxious? Those are self-regulating little tactics that we do, but they're natural.
And
If
then
we
communicate that to the kids, like tell the
exactly.
kids, hey, look,
Yeah.
I'm a human. I have issues. I have stresses. This is something that I do. right? Like be overt with that.
Yeah, and like if that works for you, what if this year you get those little Velcro strips and they're on every single desk, and the Velcro strip that you're rubbing is that self-regulation. That's something that works for you, and you share that with them and you say, "Hey, you know what? This works for me. I thought you might enjoy it when you're stressed out taking a test." It feels more authentic if you're using your own experience, sharing that with them, and then opening the door to other possibilities and having that conversation.
Great.
So I would say start with yourself. What works for you? If you love to be outdoors, find a way to get your students outdoors.
My
If
class took
you
a walk today.
Yes, if you love soft music, find a way to implement soft music into your room. And I think we can't go wrong if we're being authentic and advocating for the young people that we spend our days with.
Dave, do you have any final questions or comments before we bring things to a close this week?
My final comment is this, and it's a callback to Victoria Short. She was a previous guest and a previous colleague of ours, and she said that when she would read students' essays, when she read an essay that would just like hit the nail on the head so well, instead of giving tons of feedback, she just would write bravo. And so I don't know, I just want to say bravo. What I love about doing this and talking to folks is I'm excited to go into tomorrow, a Friday, with intention and to see where I can help kids regulate and to then relate to them and then to, if I have to reason, then reason. But just in general, I think that's the biggest piece that my introspection is telling me, like the regulation piece, because yeah, that's a hard thing for adults to do, and it stinks to be a kid and to be yelled at when you're upset and stressed about something, and
Yeah.
meeting people where they're at is so important. And sometimes not rocket science here. It seems like oftentimes the best teachers are also good people, and the teachers who are really stressed tend to be, not to project, but a lot of times are the teachers that are then don't
Yeah.
connect with the kids. And so we need to man our ship or control our ship to then help them control theirs. And so, Katie, thank you. This was awesome and inspiring, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank you so much, Katie, and audience. Thanks for listening to Authentic Educators, a podcast for teachers by teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can use today. We look forward to next episode. Thank you for listening to our conversation. As always, reach out to us at AuthenticEdPod@gmail.com if you have any questions or great ideas you'd like to share. If you enjoy what we are doing, the best way you can help is to subscribe to, rate, and share our podcast. Our goal is to reach and help as many educators as possible, and that cannot happen without folks spreading the word. We appreciate your support, and thank you again for listening to Authentic Educators.